Good morning. I'm Antoinette Mosley, the Vice Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the March 19th, 2026 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. This meeting is intended for discussion purposes only. No formal actions or votes will be taken. In addition, no public comment is taken during this meeting. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessible through the YouTube icon on the city website or via the live stream. You will also have the option to listen to the meeting live via phone by calling 855-925-2801 and entering meeting code 4898. Mayor Manheimer is traveling and unable to attend this meeting. Council and staff, when I call your name, please say a quick hello. City Manager DK Wesley.
Good morning.
Councilmember Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilmember Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilmember Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
Councilmember Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilmember Bo Hess.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Dave Dundas.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning.
And City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning.
I'll now turn it over to City Manager Wesley. DK.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Today we are at our agenda review briefing. As Vice Mayor mentioned, there will be no actions taken today. What we'll be doing is reviewing our agenda for Tuesday, March 24th. Our meeting will be held in council chambers here at City Hall to begin at 5 p.m. In advance of that meeting, we'll have a City Council budget work session. That meeting will also be held in council chambers at City Hall and will begin at 2 p.m. On today, Assistant City Manager Ben Woody will be facilitating this briefing. I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Manager Wesley, and good morning, Vice Mayor, members of council. We've got a pretty brief agenda, but we've got a lot of content on it. So I'm going to move through it fairly quickly, and just please stop me if you have questions. As Manager Wesley just mentioned, you'll start your day on Tuesday with a budget work session. Among other things, part of the focus of that work session will be expenditures for the next budget year. We'll move into our formal meeting after that. You have 3 proclamations. We've got a busy meeting for proclamations on your Tuesday meeting: Procurement Month, Social Work Month, and Arbor Day in the River Arts District. Moving into the consent agenda, and we've got only 3 items on this consent, so one of the smaller ones I think I've seen, but we'll start with item B, which is a continuation of embedded behavioral health services. This is typically designed for first responders and their families. So as you would expect, the services are primarily used by staff and APD and AFD. However, we have other instances where the services are utilized by other departments. So again, we're happy to continue that service for our employees. Item C authorizes the city manager to apply for a PARTF grant. PARTF grants are made available from the state of North Carolina. They're very, very common, oftentimes applied for and received by local parks and recreation departments. And what this grant does in particular, it will support continuing improvements at the Walton Street Park. The grant will help fund, we understand, or we think, about 3 recreational amenities, which will draw from the 2025 Walton Street Park engagement summary. So again, excited to apply for that grant. And then finally, item D is a contract amendment in the amount of $13,000. And what this does, it adds additional capabilities and functionality to Invisio, which is a software that we use for our strategic planning and project management. Any questions on the consent items? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. We'll have at your meeting, we'll have a manager's report, and we'll have an update from D. Tyrell, or I'll stop there a second. Go ahead, Councilmember Hess.
I'm glad that we are including the embedded services and renewing that contract. Is there a way to have those clinicians get a pay raise? I was a little bit dismayed at the pay band that they are in for all the hard work that they do.
That is going to be something, Councilmember Hess, we're going to have to follow up on unless anyone else on the call is able to answer that. I'm going to guess that's probably a follow-up item, but I'll pause there.
Councilmember Hess, if I can chime in, that I don't have all the details, but typically those are service contracts that we procure, which means that the price proposed actually came from the service provider and not one that the city offered them initially. So this is something that only extends for the duration of the contract. Certainly these come up just like all of our contracts every few years for reconsideration by the council. But with service contracts, oftentimes we are getting the prices directly from the provider instead of us proposing a price.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Okay, I'm going to move to manager's report. Again, we have Dee Tyrell, our Parks and Recreation Director, and who is also the liaison to our Infrastructure Recovery Board. He is planning to review, the engagement and feedback received from the Infrastructure Recovery Board on our Parks Recovery projects. So that should be a good update on the status of those projects and what we're hearing from your appointed recovery board. No public hearings on this meeting. We do have 3 new business items. The first is item A, which you did discuss previously at your March 10th work session. And this is the ordinance adopting the proposed FY27 fees and charges. And as council is aware, we typically adopt those earlier in the budget year and then move into the process of adopting our overall budget. New business item B is the adoption of a resolution creating a landhold for an arts and entertainment facility and mixed-use development at the property commonly known as Parkside, and this is adjacent to City Hall off of Eagle Street. The commitment included in this resolution is for a period of up to 2 years, and in that 2-year period, it would allow for additional community engagement as well as necessary pre-development work on this parcel of land, and those engagement efforts and pre-development work would need to be in place and happen prior to making any final decisions for the redevelopment of the property. I'll note that this item is scheduled to be discussed at the Economic Recovery Board today. So we'll have that feedback when we come back to you on Tuesday of next week. And finally, item C authorizes the city manager to execute a 4-year contract with RATP Dev in the amount of $54 million for the operation and maintenance of our transit system. As is typically the case, the contract also allows for 2-year options. So we could have a total of up to 8 years of contracted service if the city moved forward with the options. PEDE heard a presentation on this item at their meeting earlier this week. However, no recommendation was made to full council due to the lack of a seconded motion. And I will stop there, and Councilmember Turner.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Just real quick, I'm wondering, I kind of have this same question with the fees and charges, but we've pretty much processed through it. But if we were to make this decision Tuesday, it would be essentially saying we're committing to a tax increase to cover the new $800,000 in cost. And I imagine the public thinks it's still $3 million, so it's really $800,000 now. But I'm wondering what happens if we decide not to fund the $800,000. Do we have any scenarios of what the impact would be to transit? And I don't know if any other council members have this concern, so I don't want to send us down a rabbit hole, but do we know any impacts if we chose not to fund it?
I think Jessica Morris is on here, but I would presume that not funding this contract would require staff to go back, because what we're funding in this contract is the same level of service. So it would require staff to have some additional conversations from a contract perspective with the successful bidder. which will be challenging. So anything less than the amount that we have here will likely impact the service level in our transit system.
And so if this is really just, thank you for that. If this is really just like our service contract, are there other areas in the budget we can cut to make up for the 800? And I know this is a really hard question. And I don't expect an answer today, but I am curious, if we looked at what happens if we didn't, and the same thing with the fees, like we just kind of went through it and said, this is what it'll be, but never really did grasp what would happen if we said, I'm only comfortable with $50 a year in increases, and against all the tax increases, I'm just weighing it very heavily. So just sharing a little bit of where I'm at. Additional information would help.
Thanks for sharing.
Councilmember Roney.
Yeah, I know that not everyone had the opportunity to watch the Planning and Economic Development Committee update, but it is, for those who are watching today, archived on the city's YouTube. Some of the things that I'm wrestling with are, we got some big, long-time community asks in this new contract. For example, crisis management and connecting people with resources at the transit platform. This is a long-term or a long-time advocated for a public safety issue that's coming from riders, it's coming from drivers and staff, folks who can help to de-escalate situations, connect people with resources like health and human services, services around homelessness, mental health. So that's a really big win for the community, and I think for our organization and the service that we're trying to provide. Some other things that are longtime community advocacy points, more accountability. The on-time performance goals in our current contract is around 72% on-time performance. This is not only when the bus is running late, but if the bus is running early. So if a bus is running early, you don't have the opportunity to catch until the next bus. So for South Asheville routes, that would be an hour and a half later. In Swannanoa routes, that would be 2 hours later, including for Hall Creek, 2 hours later. So addressing the on-time performance is not just about the bus running late, but also running early. And this contract, it increases it to 80%. Having the technology that's in the new contract that allows that performance evaluation and accountability to happen automated, that's a really big issue for us to be able to have accountability. So I'm kind of wrestling with the fact that we, of the 4 contracts, only really had one technical company able to provide the real service that we need. And it is more expensive. And we have had issues with the current management. So I still don't think that a for-profit management company is the answer our community needs. I think we need to partner with the county and have a transit authority that has local oversight. But until we get ready for that and take that seriously, we have to have a contract to maintain our service. So my motion in PEDE was to only extend the contract for 3 years. And we had some advice from our legal team there that we can't actually do that. We couldn't say we want to try this for 2 years because it's a new contract. We can't say 3 years because it was in the RFP. So if we were to not take on this contract, would it open the door to have a shorter term period? That's something I would be curious about entertaining, but I'm not interested in renegotiating having the public safety that's needed at our transit system. And I know that we really need the accountability. So I know I've taken up a lot of space here, but I encourage folks to watch the PED conversation.
Brad, can you address the thing that Kim just said, and then we'll go to Maggie for her question about extending for 3 instead of 4. Can you address that real quick?
Yeah, certainly, Vice Mayor. And I thank Councilmember Roney for bringing this up. The term of the contract was actually part of the original procurement. So the RFP, as was mentioned, was put out asking for a pricing and service structure based upon that term, meaning that all of the people who and entities that provided bids actually used that term to provide their bidding structure. So at this point, trying to suggest a shorter or even potentially a longer term would essentially be changing the scope of what we bid. I think it would put us in a position where we would actually be running afoul of the procurement laws But even still, the vendors have made their proposal based upon that term. So changing that term, even if we restarted the process today, would likely result in a different pricing structure, and certainly one that might not be as viable for the city.
Got it. Okay, Maggie.
Thanks, Antoinette. Let's see. Was sorry to miss PEDE the other day. Thank you, Sage, for chairing in my absence. Kim and I spend a lot of time working on transit together with community members, and so this is something just really important. And I appreciate several of the big picture thoughts you were bringing up, Kim, that I share. I really, and Sage, you as well. Sage, kind of hearing you question the budget and the spending on this is on my mind as well. What I'm really thinking, and this, I'm looking to DK on, is what if we looked up and said, 5 years, where are we going to be? I don't think that we've been able to do that as a full council in a long time. And I really am curious about what a city county transit authority would look like. I'm curious about it from having better service, and also from Sage's layer of, I'm curious about what would the cost impact be? Would that share the service cost? Would that be way more expensive? I don't really know, but I would love to look at that. And Kim, to your point of we're kind of now, if this proceeds, locked into a 4-year window, I think we might need 4 years to really think about what would the state enabling legislation be to pursue a model? What would the city county strategic conversation need to be? And would the county want to have that with us? What would the preliminary design work need to do? That might actually take that long. And so I appreciate the nudging, Kim, for us to look up towards the future of what we want. And I want to explore what something different looks like from a financial feasibility, from a better service provider, from a fact that Buncombe County is turning into a suburban community before we know it. And if we only rely on roads, it's going to be really bad for our climate impact. Like, all these big picture things are very much on my mind. And I do think it could take that long, but I would love us as a council to have support from staff to really say, okay, in order to even make a decision on a regional or city county transit authority, like, what is it going to take? Because it's not a 1 year at a time decision. It's pretty complex and big. So that's Maggie's massive big picture idea of the day that doesn't really fit into this budget. But I look to my peers on council and say, as we pursue strategic planning, this is something that could be a system scale change for our community that I have a real big appetite to kicking the tires on and saying, is there a better way from both a service delivery and financial standpoint? So thanks.
Brad? You're muted, Brad.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I want to say I really appreciate this conversation. I don't want to take up too much time, but I thought I might chime in just to provide a little bit of additional context. As I think many of you know, I spent a considerable amount of time as general counsel for the largest transit agency in the state. And I have a degree of understanding of some of this, and I'm happy to share more in detail offline, but I do want to point out a couple of key things here. With regard to a regional transit authority, whether that is countywide or even larger, it's important to remember that the need for a transit operating agency would still be there. This is not something that the local governments could take on by themselves, primarily because North Carolina state law prohibits us from collectively bargaining. And the majority of bus drivers are part of unions, which would mean we would not be able to have collective bargaining agreements, which is a requirement by those unions. So one of the primary reasons for the existence of these third-party agencies is to satisfy that state law requirement, which unfortunately we do not have any control over. I do, again, want to offer myself for others who have more questions. We can certainly do that offline. I am more than happy to talk some of the details of transit and larger agency models anytime you would like.
Thanks, Brad. Council, any more questions or comments on this one? If not, Ben, you want to take it back up?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So that, without any other questions, that concludes my review of your agenda for Tuesday. And so I'm going to move down next to council committees. We have one council committee scheduled to review. That's Public Safety Committee, and I will turn it over to Jay Dundas.
Thank you, Ben. Again, good morning, Vice Mayor and members of council. Jay Dundas, Assistant City Manager. I'm going to quickly get through the public safety agenda, which takes place next Thursday, March 26th, starting at 11 a.m. It is pretty full, the agenda, and we will start with the continued discussion about the revision of the ordinance for abandoned property. Mark Matheny and staff will be there to present on this. The action that we're seeking from council is to recommend that the committee that they recommend the abandoned building ordinance wording be accepted and approved and moved to full council, which the anticipated time frame for council would be at the April 14th meeting for the full council's deliberation and voting on adopting that. We have several items from APD that we'll be discussing. Two of these are responsive to some activities that have come up in the last several months and several couple of weeks rather. The first item though is the approval of contracts or seeking the committee's approval to move the contracts and agreements to full council. One of a couple of highlights in those are receiving a federal appropriations for the community project funding award. This was Chuck Edwards helped with championing that appropriation through getting that approved and awarded to the city. So we'll be talking about more of that in more detail. And then also an agreement with the Asheville Housing Authority for activities and coordination collaboration related to services there. The next item is community safety and violence reduction efforts. This is really responsive to the multiple acts of violence that happened a couple of weekends ago. APD wants to be able to present update on the crime data for 2025, and then also to discuss the efforts that they are undertaking and the partnerships that are in place right now, working through the community to ensure safety, and then also violence efforts that are being made to reduce gun violence. That's very important at this point to get that message out there. And then council's received a lot of emails around traffic congestion in the South Buncombe Schools complex. This is around T.C. Robertson High School and various other schools in that area. This discussion is coming from, there are multiple parties involved, the school system, NCDOT, the Buncombe County Sheriff, APD, and city transportation are all at the table discussing this. There has been work that has been done by NCDOT and the county school system to analyze this issue and make recommendations. That the report that is generated in that analysis is linked in the council agenda or the public safety agenda. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that. The recommendations are very specific. And so we'll provide an update on that, and then just kind of a vision for how everybody's, that group is moving forward. Last item on the public safety agenda is the amendment to the graffiti definition. This is another request for council or for this committee rather, to consider revision to Chapter 10 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances to amend Article 6, regulation of graffiti, to recommend this to full council for adoption. This is specific to the use of sidewalk chalk on the sidewalks and throughout the city, and cleans up the ordinance, clarifies what actions the city will take moving forward. And then also just to move that to council for in a further future meeting. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, Jade, can you just confirm that 158 South French Broad has been demoed?
Yes, yeah, that was underway. I don't know exact date of that. We actually just before this meeting received an email from one of the residents out there that they were expressing their appreciation for that building having been demolished.
Okay, excellent. Kim?
Thank you, Jade. Just a couple of things. One, for the South Asheville Road conversation, my understanding is there's going to be a pretty significant community engagement around the public comment. And I know you have a long agenda for that meeting. So I think something to keep in mind and be prepared for. We've also at our committee meetings this week had trouble with the public comment feature. And some people were left out of the conversation at our PEDE meeting. So I don't know if there's a chance to be prepared for that infrastructure and do some testing around it so you don't bump into that again on that meeting. Second, do we have a picture of what the budget impact might be if we change the abandoned building policy? There obviously will be a lot of requests in our community. And I think what I'm hearing is that folks are a little tired of us, having recommendations, passing change, but then not actually following through. So will the budget impact or budget anticipation be part of the conversation?
Yes, it will be. Mark Matheny is prepared to discuss that. And so there is some advantage of just cleaning up the ordinance. And I think there's alignment with the state statute, but there is a budget implication and that will be discussed. Yes.
Thank you.
And with that, if there's no more questions, that concludes the public safety agenda review. Ben.
Thank you, Jade. And real quick review of the 8-week agenda. Jade, you covered half of the April 14th regular meeting agenda through public safety. So I'm not going to recover those, but a lot of the items Jade just covered are scheduled to move to your April 14th meeting. Want to flag a couple of things. At your 14th meeting, we have our annual State of the Airport. Once a year, the director of the airport comes and kind of gives us an update on airport operations and improvement plans. So we'll have that April 14th. Another item that is currently in HCD Council Committee, but is scheduled to come forward is the allocation of DR funds to multifamily housing projects. So we did do a request for proposals, and we had a really robust response from developers. So obviously a lot of need for publicly subsidized multifamily housing. So HCD will certainly have their work cut out for them to work through that list, but hoping to get those to council in April. And then the last item I'm going to cover that's a little bit of a good news story is, and this may change, but the county has submitted their conditional zoning for the property at 50 Cox Avenue. As you remember, that's a property the county identified for mixed use and deeply affordable housing. So they're now beginning the process to entitle that development. So that right now is scheduled to come to City Council at your April 28th meeting. And that would be a CZ request to entitle their proposed project. Any other questions on the 8-week agenda? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Manager Wesley to move us to the other item section.
Thank you, Ben. Vice Mayor and Council, I'm going to go ahead and kick off the other issues topic. And I'm excited for staff to come present this information to you. They'll continue to do the heavy lifting, and I'll pass it over to them. As we continue to see growth in the city of Asheville, we're being called to do two things at the same time and do them well, in my opinion. First, we must increase the supply of affordable housing so that our workforce, our families, future residents have a place here. And at the same time, we must protect the character and the stability of our historic neighborhoods and the people who have built them over generations. So today's presentation is our attempt, very thoughtful attempt in aligning those goals together. We have done studies that do that, and we're going to illustrate from our perspective how we can move forward in that space. We're proposing a focused approach that advances new housing opportunities while also putting tools in place to preserve existing affordability, support our longtime homeowners, and maintain the cultural fabric of our neighborhoods. So this means that Asheville will remain a place where people can not only come visit, but a place where they can continue to live, work, and belong. So I won't spend any more time talking. I'm going to pass it over to staff who will walk through the project proposal, and then we really look forward to your guidance on this. To begin, Dawa Hitch, our Communications and Public Engagement Director, will start off, and then Assistant City Manager Ben Woody will take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Wesley, and good afternoon, Vice Mayor, Council members. It's really my pleasure to be here today to kick off this first part of the presentation. And then, as Manager Wesley mentioned, I'll be turning it over to Assistant City Manager Ben Woody. So let me share my screen and we'll hop right in. All right, again, my name's Dawa Hitch, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city. And just to give a quick overview of what we'll be reflecting on and sharing today, there's a few key takeaways here about this project, this anti-displacement and affordable housing project. And the first point is that this proposed project aims to pair new housing production with anti-displacement protection. So again, looking at those two things in concert with each other. Project success depends on authentic community engagement and cross-departmental coordination. The project's strategies draw from the missing middle housing study and displacement risk assessment recommendations, as well as affordable housing plan strategies and legacy neighborhood coalition priorities that have been shared with you, Council, as well as staff. The project is action-oriented and includes multiple initiatives and efforts that can start now and all be accomplished within a one-year timeline. So what you're going to see in today's presentation is an overview and the approach that staff has mapped out to take. We'll talk a little bit about the engagement strategy and the project timeline, and then we're going to move into some more details about each of those component projects, and those being the missing middle housing study and displacement risk assessment recommendations, the affordable housing plan, specifically anti-displacement strategies, and then the 6 priority action areas that were shared by the Legacy Neighborhood Coalition. Then we'll wrap up today's time with you with next steps and an opportunity for Council to share questions about this approach. For an overview, we've named this project the Anti-Displacement and Affordable Housing Project, and its overarching goal is to develop community-driven policies, tools, and processes that strategically pair necessary housing production with clear, concrete anti-displacement protections for the most at-risk neighborhoods. As we shared, the approach and proposed actions are drawn from the 3 previously mentioned studies. As far as the objective, so we've got the goal, we've got our North Star. What are we moving towards? And then the what is our project objective. And we plan on approaching this project by using best practices in engagement, and then again, identifying and implementing actions to address affordable housing challenges and minimize displacement. So keys to the project's success really lie in the mindful sequencing of the actions that can be taken in each of these areas, as well as that cross-departmental coordination and collaboration. So making sure that we've got all of the departments that are doing work, working together to work through when certain things happen so that we can be as quick, efficient, and effective as we possibly can. And then another key component of the project is that authentic engagement. And by authentic engagement, we mean being honest about the level of influence on decision making that there will be, making sure that we're being as inclusive as we possibly can, and then being real clear and reporting back on how the engagement has informed whatever final decisions are made that relate to the different components of this project. So our strategy, we've had some early conversations with a number of different groups. This certainly is not a comprehensive list of all of the folks we intend to engage with. You can see here we've had early conversations about displacement and affordable housing with the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition representatives, GAP ABL, Asheville for All, Mountain True. We also know that there are other groups forming, and I'll just pause and say we're always excited to hear when groups are organizing and looking at tackling hard problems from multiple perspectives, and one of those groups being the Buncombe Affordable Housing Network. So again, we know that there are different groups that are emerging, people that have interest, and welcome any input on who different groups are so that we can again be as inclusive as we possibly can. So back to the strategy, there will be additional focus groups and workshops, and they will be, the intention behind those will be to bring people together, different people with different perspectives, focused on different aspects of how we can make our community better, whether that be anti-displacement or affordable housing, developers, and then of course, staff. So back to that best practice and authentic engagement, we will be looking at input from all relevant plans, and that too will be considered as project deliverables are finalized. And that's important. We just want to acknowledge that our community's given a lot of input over many years on lots of different plans, and that input doesn't just disappear. We do go back and reflect on it and incorporate it into new projects as they come to be. All right, there's a lot on this timeline, and I just want to assure you that we're going to dig into some of the details a little bit as we move into Ben's portion of this presentation. But for anybody listening or watching, this timeline shows a time frame from March to December. And that is not to say that this project ends in December, but we intend to continue to iterate, adjust however we need to make sure that we're hitting the mark on what the expectations are for what the project will accomplish. But here you will see, just starting in March, just acknowledging that we're finalizing what the deliverables are going to be in 3 different areas, that being affordable housing, anti-displacement, and then communication and engagement improvements. That work's underway and will continue. And then moving across, so in the April timeline, what's mapped out right now is developing the scope for the notification improvements. That's the development notification improvements. And then beginning to draft a homeowner repair policy. And then a deliverable. The deliverables here are in green, and I'll note them as I quickly move through the timeline. We've got a deliverable in the April time frame, and that being the Legacy Neighborhood Coalition being identified as a required engagement partner in relevant communication and engagement plans. So what does that mean in plain language? We develop communication and engagement plans around our major projects. If there's a project that's going to be adjacent to or within a legacy neighborhood, we're going to make sure we're touching base with the Legacy Neighborhood Coalition. That's part of our regular practice to reach out to groups that are impacted, but just wanted to call that out to so that there can be accountability with that deliverable. We'll also begin engagement in the April to May timeframe, and then there is a council touch point in the June timeframe, and that being early missing middle regulatory changes coming to council. And then another deliverable, unless there are changes to the timeline, is that there will be an opportunity for a resolution to come before council for adoption. And again, that resolution, we're doing some early engagement to help inform what that draft looks like. And you can see here in the timeline that that's in the May to June timeframe. So now I'm going to move into the August timeframe. There, we'll be looking at launching the first project for anti-displacement and middle housing, while we are also piloting an anti-displacement tool. And that tool will include mitigation actions for development, such as the use of community development block grant funding and inclusion of public art and history as a potential mitigating factor. We've got to do the work, we've got to engage around that and do the work before exactly what that will look like is determined. But again, wanting to launch that pilot in the August timeframe. I'm going to pause a minute here just to share too that we're getting to work on developing what this could look like in coordination and co-creating with community groups. And as projects are coming before council or operational projects, our intention is to use the tools that we've developed to date to begin getting a feel for what it's going to be like to run projects through the tools. So I don't want anybody out there to think that nothing's going to happen. We're going to be frozen. We're not going to do anything. But what we're learning along the way, we plan on applying to projects as they come about. But as far as an accountable deadline, launching that pilot is set for the August timeframe. Then we want to make sure, just best practices and engagement, we want to check in and get some feedback on how the tool's being received. There's an opportunity, of course, for this to be an iterative process so that we can adapt and adjust based on, feedback that we get after the pilot's launched. And then we expect the tool to be finalized in November. So also in that same time frame, we expect a good bit of money to be going out into the community for affordable housing. So we're looking at about $2 million anticipating being available through the Housing Trust Fund, about $5 million available for the Right at Home through the Continuum of Care, and about $1 million in the launch of the homeowner repair program. So again, you can see that our intention has been to make sure we're sequencing things in a beneficial way to the community. Last bit on the timeline is another council touch point in November, and that's around the area of missing middle regulatory changes. So we've got 2 touch points there. We've got some early things we think that can be done, and then there may be some more complex regulatory changes that could be proposed, and we've got that slotted for sometime around November to give us time to collect data, get more input from the tool and some of the other deliverables for this project. So that's a lot. I know I just flew through a lot of different pieces. It's a lot of different departments, but again, Ben is gonna take us into the next portion of the presentation where we're gonna get into a little bit more details.
Actually, can you go back a slide for just a second? Because I kind of have a comment. So first of all, I'll start by saying this is really impressive, and I love the level of engagement that's embedded as well as actionable items. I think this is fantastic. Nothing really has to stop, which was the intention when LNC came forward a while ago. This morning I saw a post from a member of the LNC that kind of highlighted some negative pushback that LNC had been getting from pro-housing groups. One where they are being referred to as the Black Wall pejoratively. And what struck me was I immediately thought of Save the Woods. No one is referring to Save the Woods as the green wall or the white wall. But what struck me was, I believe if a process like this had been underway where the community could have communicated or had some say in what happens on the campus, the big push that Save the Woods now has would not have even been necessary. So for me, This is another instance where I want to highlight that legacy neighborhoods, which are not Black neighborhoods anymore necessarily, are the canary in the coal mine. So if we have a process where we lean into them, other groups later will benefit. So thank you for this, and then move on to the next slide. I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you, Dawa. Great background information, and I'm still amazed that you were able to fit all that on one slide. That was no small feat. It spreads across an entire whiteboard in their office, so it was a lot of consolidating. I'm going to unpack some of the details. So you saw the timeline, and Dawa flagged a couple of things. I'm going to talk about what those actually are. So what is actionable in those details? And I'm going to draw from the 3 studies that Dawa previously referenced. I'm going to go through these in chronological order. So this will be the order in which these studies came about, or these efforts, or these documents. So we'll start with missing middle housing study. I think it's important to note, and I think this is often not said, but the missing middle housing study included an entire section on displacement risk assessment. So there's a lot of good information that study contemplates around how to evaluate and assess risk, and then how to potentially mitigate. I don't know that you can ever stop anti-displacement, but you can put in efforts to mitigate it, to try to manage it, try to minimize it. So next slide. Dawa, your next slide, I think. It's okay. So the missing middle housing study was completed. It was not adopted by council, but it was completed in November of 2023. So it's been around for a while. In short, that study was intended to support the city's strategic goal of providing equitable, stable, and affordable housing. And more particularly, and these are words directly from the study, it was one of its overarching goals was to identify regulatory and policy barriers that negatively impact housing supply production. So that is an effort to look for additional ways to increase the supply of housing. Next slide.
Ben, real quick, what
Yeah.
do you mean by council didn't adopt missing middle? Like, were we expected to vote on something? I feel like
well, I mean, I'll go ahead and say, nor did council adopt the affordable housing plan. We'll talk about
Right,
that.
right.
I don't mean anything other than to say they weren't officially adopted by council. That doesn't mean we shouldn't follow the recommendations or we shouldn't use them.
Okay.
I think that question comes up a lot of times, what was adopted and what isn't. So I'm just noting that for information.
I'm happy to adopt it if we need
Yeah.
to. It helps in some.
You could certainly do that at any point. So a couple of things from missing middle, and this is where we kind of get into what is actually in the timeline. So first, it's worth noting you have implemented parts of that study already. You did that through modifying project level thresholds to increase housing along corridors. You eliminated parking standards in certain areas. You increased building sizes along corridors, and you made some updates to cottage development flag lots. What's important about those 3 changes is they don't apply citywide. They're all limited to certain zoning districts or certain geographic areas. So what we've proposed, or what we've identified, really the planning department has, so credit to them, is a couple of things that the missing middle study recommends that we make changes to in our ordinance. These are things that we as staff are ready to update. So in the slide deck, when we talk about bringing things forward, these are items that we believe we can bring forward relatively quickly. They're in blue, they're italicized. 3 regulatory changes: eliminating minimum parking in all districts, expanding ADU regulations to allow for larger ADU sizes, excuse me, and enabling or allowing duplexes in all zoning districts. So those are relatively simple recommended regulatory changes from the missing middle study. Another thing, again, that's embedded in that displacement risk analysis that's important and supports the concept of the tool that Dawa referenced earlier is the idea of creating a displacement vulnerability risk data set, or identifying where there is risk for that. And then based on that, coming up with ways to implement displacement mitigation strategies. So again, those are 4 things that are in that study that we think could relatively quickly be moved forward. Real quick, Councilmember Hess, there are other things in the study that I think are more complex and perhaps could have more impact on certain areas. And so those are ones that, we've listed a couple here, the larger type of multifamily, middle development types, and things like small backyard lots. We would propose those being considered ideally as part of a UDO rewrite, but at some point after working through the items we've highlighted in blue. And I'll stop there, Councilmember Hess.
Thank you so much. This is so exciting. Thank you, Dawa and Ben. I'm just making sure that the anti-displacement quote unquote tool is going to show us a both what a given project would do to add displacement, but also what not building a certain project and housing would do to displacement. Again, the idea that anything that the city is doing to adding displacement is a little bit of a logical fallacy because we haven't been able to move forward with these things. So people are leaving the city because there are no places to live. There are no opportunities here. So I'd like to have that both and analysis so we have the full picture and all the information.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that comment, Councilmember Hess. And Dawa, if you can move to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about, so let's talk about anti-displacement, or I'm sorry.
It looks like Maggie has
I'm
a
sorry.
comment or a question. Maggie?
Thank you. Back on that list one, I'm loving every slide of this presentation. I feel like, as Vice Mayor was saying, like, I feel like council has seen that there is a both and approach where we can really engage honestly with community and pursue these goals. And I'm like seeing it come together, and it's it just feels like great synergy, very hopeful for the impact in our community. And on this slide, when I'm recalling back to Dawa's slide that was looking at timeline, and what I recall seeing was staff is kind of forecasting 2 batches of regulatory approaches, meaning there's like a spring, council come look at this, regulatory changes, and then a winter. And if you're saying these are like the ones that are ready to update, can I infer that this is like we could see a spring batch to consider these ones in blue? Or are we not ready to put a date to that?
Yeah, we've talked about that, and that's a good question, Councilmember Ullman. We've talked about that internally, and yeah, we are prepared to begin. We'll have to work through planning and zoning, and I do think there needs to be some touch points through the engagement process. But yeah, we're prepared to start moving these ones italicized in blue forward for consideration. But what I'm going to show you on the slide in a minute, I think we can pair that with some real tangible displacement work as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councilmember Mosley.
And also, so when I see displacement listed in an index, and kind of piggybacking on what Bo said, will the displacement tool include different forms of displacement? You'll recall, Ben, in a previous HCD meeting, we talked about, I don't know, social cultural displacement, physical displacement, climate displacement. What do we mean when we say displacement in this instance?
So that's a good question. I don't have the correct answer. I may never have the correct answer, but I think it can. We haven't created the tool yet, but the tool is envisioned in the missing middle study, I think is really focused on housing displacement. That is principally what that tool is laid out would do. I think there's an opportunity, and we'd have to work with, there's other people that have to be a part of this, but yes, I don't see why a tool couldn't envision economic displacement or cultural displacement. We just have to understand what are the data sets that would underlie that and help us understand when that is happening or maybe close to happening. So I think the answer is yes, we can explore different types of displacement. I will say, in just transparency, the missing middle work really focuses on housing displacement principally.
Okay, so this is great. I see Bo has a hand up, but I can't tell if that's a leftover hand up or if you have a question, Bo.
It was a leftover.
Okay, Ben, back to you.
Okay, good. Thank you for the question. So moving on to the affordable housing plan. Next slide, Dawa. This plan was completed so this was completed after the missing middle study, and it was completed in September of 2024. And y'all know a lot of things happened in September of 2024. So one thing I'll say about the plan, and we haven't talked about this in a while, but it remains true, is the plan is very much, I think it's a very forward-thinking approach. I think it really looks for creative ways to address our housing challenges, but it's very mindful of impacts on neighborhoods and community. And the idea, and I found a nice, I think, sentence from that plan from the early, the plan sets a course to accommodate future growth, but also preserve affordability and increase equitable access to housing for all residents. So again, it kind of has a both and approach, which I think the missing middle study actually does as well. If you can go to the next slide. So here's a couple of things that these are, tangible things that we can and are doing related to trying to limit, reduce the impact of displacement. The items that are in black at the bottom of the slide, those are things that are really, already in place. Some of it's already there and available. Some of it's happening, Those are things that, some of it's just making sure that people are aware of things. We need to make sure that our residents know there's a tax relief program for income qualified homeowners. So there's a lot of ways that this happens. There are three really important things that I want to flag. These top three italicized blue items, these are anti-displacement strategies named in the plan, and we have over $8 million of funding available to support these three strategies. And so first is, typically we've used our HTF funding to construct new units. Well, what we're doing this cycle is really using the HTF funding to focus on things like down payment assistance, home ownership projects, community land trust, land acquisitions. So we think these, and that's like Dawa showed, we're hoping to have NOFOs prepared for this summer and start putting those monies into communities this fall. So we have a great opportunity to look for ways to try to support neighborhoods and maintain, naturally occurring affordable housing. Another big deal, I think, is we have bond funding dedicated for our home repair resources. Again, that's getting partners on board and make sure we're targeted where we put that home repair bond money. We want to make sure that people can stay in their homes and we can maintain naturally occurring affordable housing. And then finally, our work through the COC. This is important. This is funding that really belongs to the COC. It's over $5 million. But with that right at home funding, COC is going to be able to work to find solutions for really our most vulnerable residents when it comes to housing insecurity. So again, these funding and these programmatic things that really support anti-displacement, you're going to see these begin to come online this summer into the fall. And we think that can pair up pretty nicely with some of the regulatory reforms, as well as the development of the kind of displacement tool. Councilwoman Roney.
Thank you for letting me ask this question while the slide is up. So I see the community land trust here, and then on the other side with the status, I see land acquisition. So let me make sure I have this right. I think of the example of the project on Grail Street, that was that partnership, and Cappadocia as well, with the land trust and also the Preservation Society. And I know that the funding stack was tricky, but we're seeing examples in our community of preserving affordability and, guarding against cultural displacement. So is it right for me to be connecting those dots that we're talking about land acquisition funds and we have an existing partner?
Correct.
Thank you.
And we may find other partners along the way as well. So, and again, all this work, these are things that our advisory boards will discuss, the community will be a part of. So, we have time to flesh these things out in the coming months.
And then a second question I have is around home repair. One of the things that I'm learning through our recovery funding process is that it hasn't exactly been easy or even possible for some of our homegrown organizations to participate in the repair programs through the CDBG-DR funds at the state level. So because the way I understand it, you have to have experience utilizing CDBGDR funds in the past 4 years to even participate. Is this an opportunity for us to work within our guidelines instead of having to use the state guidelines to bring on board some of those homegrown repair organizations?
Absolutely. And that's what makes this a really unique opportunity, and where I think council can develop a program and an approach that really directs the program and the monies in a way that is meaningful for Asheville, the way we think it needs to be. So I think this is a great opportunity.
So one of the reasons why I'm hearing that would truly help with the anti-displacement part is we're then allowing, like, I think of the youth build program in the Burton Street community that they're developing, that young people would have good paying jobs. And at the same time, we're addressing the fact that our the population that is in the profession of construction is aging out. So we need more people in our community to have that skill set. But it also means good paying jobs in the communities that are impacted by displacement, which means you're more eligible or have the funds and capital to buy a home in the neighborhood you grew up in. So that's why I'm seeing that connection. I just wanted to share some curiosity around what are our metrics for measuring if it worked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know those specifically, but that has to be a part of this process. And those are things that we have to bring back to council to evaluate. All of these, whether it's a regulatory change or a programmatic addition, we have to demonstrate if they work or don't. I don't know if all these will work as intended, but we have to track metrics, bring it back to council, be willing to pivot where it's necessary.
And it's not my intention to cause any more delay than we already have, especially on the anti-displacement part. But it does seem to me an opportunity to make sure that we're collecting data at the front end.
Right. I agree. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to move the next slide. This is the last piece of the presentation. So the most recent kind of document or framework that we have is the priority action areas. There's 6 of those that were developed by the LNC. They've had a representative that spoke to council. So I think everybody's familiar with the 6 kind of categories. I'm not going to read those to you, but we'll go to the next slide. So this is again, within the timeline, this is what some of that begins to look like. You know, I don't want to speak for the LNC, so I'm trying to very carefully, I'm framing this as the discussions that we've had around these 6 categories to date. And, you know, we've drawn from some of the documents they've shared with us and a slide deck that was presented to HCD in January. But what you can see, and a lot of this is present in the timeline as well, is the idea of this index and review, this displacement impact tool. That is something we're committed to developing. I think the missing middle displacement risk assessment supports that type of tool. And that's a kind of a critical thing that Dawa showed in the timeline. And so it's the development of a tool so you can begin to assess and see where risk may exist. And then ideally you can begin to imagine what are mitigation measures that you can help to reduce or minimize. I don't think we can ever get rid of displacement risk, but we can probably find ways to help reduce or minimize that risk. Another thing is the idea of having a better notification tool. We have a great tool, but we need to make sure it works for the people that need it to work for them. And so we're committed to working with any neighborhood for that matter. It's a good tool for every neighborhood and looking for ways to enhance that. Another thing is having, you know, again, neighborhood-based bodies such as the LNC that can be named as a required stakeholder. That's just us making the effort to include that in, as part of the way that we do business in terms of project management and how we share information. Next slide, Dawa. Neighborhood-based zoning protections. You know, one of the things we've talked about is, this is really hard to do, but, you know, where are the impact areas in our most vulnerable neighborhoods? What are the boundaries? What do those look like? How do we address those or name those? So just continuing to work through, are there place-based zoning standards that can protect community character, limit displacement, but also allow some flexibility in terms of housing supply? That's a very challenging topic area, but one that we're committed to working on. There's some legislative limitations on some of that as well from Raleigh, but another thing is the idea of using our CDBG and our public investments in a way that helps to actually stabilize vulnerable neighborhoods. That could be through investing in infrastructure. That could be through the way that we deploy homeowner repair programs. There's a lot of ability to take a look at those types of investments and the impact they have. And then finally, the idea that when we are in a neighborhood, a legacy neighborhood for that matter, making sure that our capital projects and our investments recognize and understand the art, history, and culture that exists in those neighborhoods. So being more mindful of maybe the impact that our own investments can have in neighborhoods. Next slide.
Can you hold up? Can you go back one
Yeah.
second?
Sure.
Sage, when I'm looking at the CDBG, I'm going to say DR, an example of this would be the water department request. Okay, Ben.
Yeah, agree. I was actually thinking similarly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a great example that we talked about at HCD, and it's not just that you invest, but it's also like, how does that investment occur? What's the impact of it? So yeah, good example. So that puts us here. I'm sorry, it's been a long presentation, but our intent in this project and what we're proposing is to leverage community partnerships, and we're willing, to adjust department work plans to prioritize this work. And then I think our big question for council is your feedback on the scope and timeline. Any other questions you have? And I'll stop there. And Councilman Roney.
Yeah, I just wanted to start with gratitude for not just the work that staff is doing, but the way staff is doing the work, to seek understanding from our community. That's, I think of the legacy neighborhoods work, volunteering so much time and energy to be proactive in preserving our existing affordability. But the fact that our staff has taken the time and energy to make sure that we try to get it right. And we're going to have hiccups along the way, and we'll learn and we'll make adjustments as we need to. But this is a human effort to right some wrongs of the past, and that's not an easy thing to do. And I just really appreciate the intention.
And I'll speak in agreement to that. I definitely want to give a shout out and a thank you to the legacy neighborhoods for holding our feet to the fire and requiring us to follow our own plans. Thank you, Dala. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, DK. Thank you, everyone, for this. I see that Sage has her hand up, and so you have a comment? Oh, and because if we actually adopted the plan, we would be saying we're going to do anti-displacement work. So the legacy neighborhoods, again, are asking us to do what our plans say is best and what we say our values are. Sage?
I'll share additional appreciation. I'm thrilled that some of this is getting some action behind it. The timeline to me feels really good. I feel like I feel a little bit of a responsibility. I feel, as this council does too, that it has taken us a significant amount of time to get here. And I always try and think what that means for the actual resident, because when we're talking about displacement, it means they might already be displaced. When we're talking about home ownership, it might mean that they've been priced out. So expeditious advancement with thoughtful process is ideal. So I'm thankful. I also have a curiosity, just generally speaking, we do these big studies and we get these big lists of ideas, and then they get boiled down to kind of like a plate of options for council to kind of surf through, and what can staff really, physically accomplish gets weighed in. But along the way, things, ideas, concepts, values, policies kind of get pushed off the plate for one reason or another. We can't do that one. The state won't let us. We don't know if we have a desire for that. It might be too hard, whatever. I'm curious what that whole list looks like before I say this is great and this is awesome. Those 4 things that are in blue get me really excited. Let's start. I'm wondering if there's 6. Do you know what I mean? I just don't know how to gauge what else we could be doing because I don't have that information. And I think I've made a request in the past similar, but I don't know how to gather that. I mean, if I need to pour through studies, or if there's already staff reports where it's like, these are identified things, here's what we can handle, here's what we are shelving. Is there a shelved list somewhere?
Yeah, there both both the plan and the study have implementation tables. So there's absolutely a list that we can share. We can put it in the follow-up document. I want to know, and that doesn't, we should, maybe we do all of it, maybe we don't, but I do want to note for this presentation, all this is happening in the window of 1 year.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are a lot of things that need to happen in year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, but we can.
And that's great.
Yeah, we can share
I wonder if
the
year
full.
one should have some things that I'm not aware of because I wasn't involved in this whole process, right? And there may not be, and this may be all that we can do. I just want to do my due diligence on what other things there might be.
We can share the full list. Some, it's like any plan, some are doable, some are more challenging. But again, our focus is what can we do by the end of this year?
Which I think is wonderful. I really appreciate taking some action and getting this hard work done. It's hard, but we have been approaching it very strategically and slowly, and it's causing pains in other ways. So let's just get through it. We'll get through it together. I'm excited. Thank you, everybody.
I'll jump in on kind of feedback. Earlier I expressed appreciation, and I'm hearing that from a lot of council members. So I just want to start with that again. Building on Sage's point, something I don't necessarily see in this timeline is a council prioritization conversation for what is next. I think that you've basically done a good job of hearing what key community leaders and council has been saying the last couple of years as we've been preparing to get this moving again. But I think that I'd be curious to see if there's bandwidth to entertain that type of conversation. And it could really be as simple as a PED meeting and an HCD meeting of like, here's the whole list. Is there anything that we want to put on deck for next year? But I think that continuing to have council's policy direction, setting the tone for the strategies from these plans is needed. And I don't see that this year.
I don't know if that's just a comment or we're expecting a.
I mean, I guess it's a request or question to follow up.
I agree, Maggie. And I'm kind of in my head thinking, should I be doing more personal homework on this and proposing things to you, or do we want to have this as a broader discussion amongst the group, which is what I'm kind of hearing you say in that. But I also don't want to cause delays. So, how we get there, I guess can be flushed out. I'm willing to invest more time and go back through the studies and look at the list that's sent and see if anything really pops out as, gosh, it'd be a really good thing. Like, for example, I'm really thrilled to see down payment assistance was in there because I'm carrying this heavy weight of watching the market slowly lower and finally seeing those home ownership prices that we were so desperate to get when we launched DPA before, like the 250 range. Those days are back. And I think the onus is on us to move quickly, right? To be like, holy cow, this is a moment in time and we better grab it while we can. So I'm glad it's in the list, but I just wonder, are there some other things like that?
So I'll add that this is the start of the conversation. You're right, Councilmember Ullman. What we did was look at the studies and reflect on what we've heard from you all thus far to build this timeline and evaluate that against the capacity that we have here. I'm very grateful to Ben and Dawa and the rest of the team, because it's a team of folks working on this, that they've been able to consider what it could look like to get started. So this is just a start. I think if we'll take a follow-up and share more information with you all. And if you see things that you think we might not have considered, share that with us, and it will likely either we'll have to adjust the timeline or consider taking some things off. So there'll be some conversation around it, but this is just the beginning of this conversation. Our intent is to really build this kind of both into the infrastructure of how we do our work. So it will continue, and we'll continue to seek policy direction as we move forward. But we'll send a follow-up to try to get condense or make concise the information that we have for your consideration.
Thank you. And DK, I want to express just a particular thank you to you for taking this under your wing right away. Yeah, that's good work.
Thank you so much. So, and if what I'm hearing from council is a general consensus to move forward for now with what has been presented. That's what I'm That's if I'm gauging the temperature, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So Ben, is this the end of your presentation? And then do we need to, and Dala, do we need to hand it back to DK? Who's up next?
Yeah,
That's
that,
the meeting, right?
yeah, that's all we have today. Thank you for y'all's consideration and listening, and that's it.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we can go ahead and adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.
Meeting, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.